Rick, I think you're on mute.
Okay, there we go. My apologies, I was on mute and I'm talking away. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us. This is meeting number 2 of the City Playhouse City Managers Advisory Group. Before we get started, let me read the land acknowledgement. This meeting is taking place while acknowledging that the land on which we gather and that is currently known as the City of West Hollywood is the occupied unceded seized territory of the Gabrielino, Tongva, and Gabrielino Quiche peoples. All right, so welcome again, everybody, for members of the public who are joining us tonight and our advisory group who are joining us again. We're excited to be here and dive a little bit deeper into potential design directions for the new city playhouse for the city. Just recapping last week, we had 3 presentations from 3 different architectural firms sharing with us sort of their broader visions for what a playhouse could potentially be on this site. And the purpose of tonight's discussion is a deeper dive into some of the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses of each of these visions and how well they align with some of the city goals and environmental policies. And so tonight's discussion will be a group discussion amongst the advisory group, and then we will make time to hear comments from the public. And then we will sort of wrap up with some thoughts on each of the proposals should one of the 3 teams be selected by the City Council to go forward, how that would play out in terms of the design for a new playhouse. So we've got a rather ambitious night set up here, or late afternoon and early evening. And so we'll want to get right into it. For those who didn't join us on the last meeting, and hold on a second, I'm having trouble with the advance button here. My controls are, there we go, now they're on. For those of the our community members who are joining us, we have a 10-person advisory group with us. I'm just going to introduce everybody so we can move forward. From the Arts and Cultural Affairs Commission, we have Chair Martin Gatman and Commissioner Lindsay Deaton. From the Public Facilities Commission, we have Noemi Torres. Commissioner Elaine Polachek is not able to join us tonight. And from the Planning Commission Design Review Subcommittee, Commissioner Rogerio Carbollero is joining us. We also have some outside expertise that we're really very grateful are able to spend the time and join us to help add to the conversation. We have Andrew Campbell, who's a resident of the city and provides some much valued input on arts and culture. We have Jason Larcher, who is principal and CEO from Green Dinosaur, a sustainable design firm. We have Esther Margulies, who's principal from Office of Design Landscape, licensed landscape architect. We have Brian Wickersham, founding partner of Ox Architecture and designer of a playhouse facility not unlike this one. And we have Uzair Faruqi from MGAC Design and Construction, who's going to be contributing some thoughts about cost opinions and constructability when we get to that point this evening. I had introduced myself at the beginning of the meeting. Also with us is Rebecca Eman, Arts Manager from our Arts Division, Helen Collins from our Facilities and Field Services, managing that division. Garen Yawlis is our Architectural and Urban Designer. He's online. And then I'm not seeing Eva, but perhaps she will be joining us this evening as well. All right, so for anybody that is interested in participating after they've heard some of the discussion this evening, we're happy to take your thoughts and comments. There's a couple of different ways to do that. One is using the raised hand icon on your Zoom controls. If you feel that you would like to comment in written form and not verbally, that's wonderful as well. So please feel free to add your comments in the chat box, and we'll try to monitor that as we go during public comment. So tonight, we had set aside some time to look at the three proposals that were put forth last week in the presentations. We saw three very good presentations, each of which had sort of strengths and weaknesses that we'd like to kind of assess a little bit more. So in order to do that, we've set up sort of a structure that might help get us through the evening in a somewhat organized way. So we've divided the discussion into specific topic areas. These are in alignment with the advisory group's evaluation sheets that they were provided. And these areas include urban activation, site planning, sustainability, programming and performance flexibility, site and building constructability. And then, as I mentioned, we're also going to be setting aside a little bit of time just to hear about the preliminary cost opinions that each of the firms provided. So if we move forward into some of our topic areas, I think actually before I do that, Rebecca, did you want to add any thoughts to the process before we move forward?
No, we're moving right along, just fine, thank you.
Okay, great. Just feel free to jump in if there's anything that you'd like to add, because it's really important that the Arts Division needs are integrated into this conversation, because they're going to be our prime operator and overseer of the facility.
Hi, Rick.
Yes.
This is Lindsay Deaton. I'm seeing a possible G, which would be function. Does it function, or would that be under programming?
That would probably be programming. Yeah. So Lindsay, when we get to that, just remind me and we'll emphasize that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, I would like to acknowledge that David Wilson, our city manager, has joined us briefly, just to look in. He might have jumped off. So, but welcome, David. Thank you for joining us as well. All right, so let's sort of jump in. We're leaving roughly 15 minutes for each topic area. And I think if we could try the raised hand function amongst our advisory group to keep it somewhat orderly, but it would be great if there is some back and forth discussion and even debate. If you feel there's areas that you have differences of opinion, we'd definitely like to hear that. So let's maybe dive into our first sort of topic area, which is urban activation. And so each of the three proposals are put up on the screen to sort of provide some memory to what was presented last week. And when it comes to urban activation, what we're really interested in is the urban image, the urban identity of the project as it relates to the city and its greater context. What does this city playhouse signify? Should it be more of an iconic structure that stands out? Should it be more of a community art house vibe that maybe is more infill based and not trying to be too much, being a little bit more modest? And what is the pedestrian experience as individuals walk by the building? How are they engaged? Is there opportunities for those who are participating in any sort of performance or event that evening to feel welcome and comfortable? For those who are not attending an event but walking by, Is there an engagement to further inform them about the arts programming in the city? So let me go to the full slide version here, which is where you okay, Garen, I may need some help here. Where is the full screen version?
Under slideshow, you can say from current slide.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Apologize for that. Okay, much better, much easier to see. So the pedestrian experience. So when we talk about urban activation, these are the type of considerations we're looking for. I think some of the firms looked at the parkway and the space between the facade and the curb as an area of engagement, and others preferred to have you look inward into a forecourt or other device. So with that, I think I'd like to open up conversation about urban activation, some of the strengths and weaknesses, anything that members of the advisory group would like to share with their colleagues and point out aspects they think really work well or perhaps do not work well.
I think Esther has her hand up there.
Okay, Esther, I'm having trouble seeing the hand. So Esther, go ahead.
Thanks for that. It looks like the hands are now going up all over the place, which is
Okay,
great.
good.
I'm so glad you had this category because I think this is so important on a critical boulevard in the city. And one thing that whenever I'm in West Hollywood, I marvel at the people, the street life. I mean, the way we've opened up restaurants to the sidewalk and really created a street life that is more than just a gesture. But actually, when I think of activation, I think that, the first thing that comes to my mind is the activation of people. So it seemed to me that, although I appreciated every team really, I think, made an effort in this direction, the BAR scheme to me was the most successful at really creating a seamless continuity between the sidewalk and the building, the lobby, the potential spill out into that courtyard space, which is well defined and proportioned. And the thing that I kept looking for in everybody's scheme was, where is the cafe? Where is the thing that when there's not a performance going on is going to activate this space? And from a few years of designing parks and open space, one thing I have learned is a park in itself does not activate. Parks also need things to draw people there. And so what I looked at in this really was which of these three beautiful schemes, and you can see it actually even in these renderings from the street, which one of them looks most active in terms of people and activity. And I love the transparency in the second floor of having a sense of when there is something going on from the street. It may not be described, it's a different kind of beacon, which has humans in it. And the last thing I'll say is I was actually, when we heard the Perkins and Will presentation, I wanted to ask them about the lack of a marquee, because they're the only group that seemed to have done kind of thorough historical research. And that marquee was a prominent portion of all of the historic iterations of this. And I was really happy to see that the other two schemes brought a sense of announcement, what's coming, what to look forward to the street and the marquees.
Thank you, Esther. That's fantastic help here. Andrew, you're up next. Andrew Campbell, followed by Rogerio.
Thank you. Again, I concur. All three designs are really interesting and very different. I hear what, what Esther was saying on these designs. What I think is particularly strong about the bar architects is that whole redesign of the sidewalk, I think, that interior space. I think what's strong about the Grimshaw piece is that it actually has that gallery, that art gallery space out there. I really love the Perkins and Will design. And I know that they commented on the fact that the greenery, the hanging greenery may not be feasible, but I think that adds such a wonderful element to it. I kind of like the understated quality of the signage. They do have it on the side and they do have it in the front, more of a as like a poster. So those are my comments right now.
Thank you, Andrew. Rogerio, followed by Brian.
Hi, those are great comments. I prefer, well, from a street activation and incorporation of the pedestrian experience, I prefer the Barr and Perkins and Will project over the Grimshaw Architects. I like how Barr and Perkins and Will, the sidewalk just kind of moves into the building and kind of blurs the definition between the built form and the sidewalk. I agree with Esther, that courtyard activated by the restaurant or cafe or whatever that will be in the Barr architect scheme is a successful move. I remember Perkins and Wills mentioning that possibility. So I could see that happening in the Perkins and Wills also. What I really liked about the Perkins and Will project was that side lower level engagement of the side courtyard. I think that for impromptu type of performances or more casual type of things on the weekend, I really thought that brought something to that scheme, which the other ones didn't bring or didn't have that opportunity to have something much more informal. The Barr architects, I really like how the performance space bleeds out into the courtyard and it kind of blurs that edge also. But I was having a hard time understanding how that would act or work in real life. Could you really extend the seating into the courtyard to take advantage of the stage presence? I don't know enough about that perspective to really make that determination. And then in terms of buildings themselves and their presence on the street, I like how the Perkins and Will project kind of references 8225 Santa Monica Boulevard up the street. It has a similar building party, kind of engages the street the same way. I agree with Andrew. I kind of like the banner informality kind of approach to the Perkins and Will project. I think there's a lot of flexibility there, and that could be fun to explore with over time. The Grimshaw Architects project, I like this project a lot. It feels more formal. And this project, it actually reminds me a little bit of the Blue Dot store on Beverly. It's the same sort of party and kind of same sort of approach, though obviously a much more sophisticated building. The Barr Architects project, I feel is the least successful from an architectural language point of view, and from a presence point of view, I think the other two are much more successful from that perspective.
Thanks, Rogerio. Brian Wickersham.
So I agree with a little bit with all the comments thus far. I think that one of the things as I was going through and working through the questionnaire that was given to us and looking at which projects worked best from kind of an urban activation and an exterior open space perspective versus the ones that function a little bit better programmatically, you saw really the interconnection of those two things. And it strikes me that the projects that work best as far as creating urban sort of exterior space and activated sidewalks do so at the detriment of the function of the building. And I think that has to be weighed as we look at this, that there are things that work quite well in each of these schemes, but there are some, I think, systemic sort of functional things that have to be balanced with it. I think with so just kind of working left to right, I think that the first proposal, the Perkins Will proposal, offers a really unique visitor experience, this sort of urban porch and sort of bringing people into the building in a unique way, and the sort of park adjacent to it. I think it's nice that there's an offering of some public space, but it's also, I think, just sort of functionally, whether or not we can separate that from the fact that it is parking at the back, I think is kind of a difficult leap to make. I also think that really the struggle there is that in order to create this sort of urban experience at the face of the building, a lot of the function was given up of the actual theater space, having to stack the public sort of facing and the back house things is sort of a problematic thing. And I think the same with the bar architect's proposal as well. This courtyard looks really nice and really engaging, but I struggle to get to how it's achievable given the programmatic requirements of this building. In really looking at that just from a pure function standpoint, is this a space we can actually build once we meet the requirements off of the alley for the parking, once we meet the requirements for the functionality of the theater? It doesn't leave a lot of space. And I think that's what we're seeing in the Grimshaw proposal, that once you really fit in all the programmatic elements that are required, it doesn't leave a lot of open space. And my recommendation to the city would be, as we are looking at all these proposals, we look at the benefit of that open space and that public exterior space versus the program, and maybe consider whether or not the parking should be a requirement, because I think pulling that out may provide more opportunity to get more quality open space, like the things that people are gravitating to in the bar architect's proposal and the Perkins and Will proposal. Those little parklets are quite nice. And it leaves a lot to, it gives you something that you could believe could be a really beautiful space that gets used a lot. But I think in practical purposes, getting to the program requirements internally, like the Grimshaw proposal doesn't leave a lot of exterior space. And I only say that because I don't want to let the pictures that we see mislead us into thinking that you're getting apples to apples on the building when we get these exterior spaces that we're showing in the renderings.
All right, thank you, Brian. And we'll talk about site planning a little bit more in a minute too, with the parking that you raised. So we'll dive a little deeper on that. All right, so we have Martin Gantman followed by Lindsay Deaton.
Thank you. Excuse me, I found myself actually being really conflicted between having a signature type of building for this project versus something that reflected more of the local streetscape. And I finally sided with something that was more iconic, reflected by the Perkins and Will project, for not only because I think the city can use more of this kind of building. We have some in West Hollywood Park. We have significant buildings like the library and the new sports athletic building. And we have diminutive buildings like the multi-purpose building at Plummer Park. So we do both. It would be nice to have something, I think, that is that stands out for our new Playhouse. And also, I think that the Perkins and Will project is the only one here that will really hold up well against the new building that will go to the east, because I expect that that building might be 3 to 5 stories. And I think that whatever is here is going to have to hold up. I think I'm not persuaded by the Grimshaw project, this idea of the kind of street side corridor or storefront corridor. I think that's going to be empty a lot and look like an empty space, an unleased space. So I'm a little concerned about that. The Perkins and Will project has obvious difficulties that have to be resolved, that we talked about, programmatic difficulties, and but I think we'll get to that later. But I think those could be overcome.
Great, thank you, Martin. Lindsay followed by Uzair.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Well, I'm misfunction here. And, you know, one of my first questions in looking at a site is, does it meet the needs of the folks that are ultimately going to be able to use it or need to use it? And a question I don't know who to ask this of is, do we need to have a park? I mean, is a park important? Is a green space important to have, you know, in this, you know, theater complex? That's my first question. I echo Esther's sentiments with regards to the bar architect's inviting nature of its streetscape. I have an experience with other theaters that have very much similar openings. There, I can see the gates that would slide back and forth. And, you know, it's a good question to ask about, you know, a cafe, something like, you know, the West Hollywood Playhouse Cafe. You know, let's meet there for tea or something like that. In terms of public activation, you could have it every day. I do like seeing humans being involved. And I echo Commissioner Gantman's reflection about the Grimshaw architect piece. I love, though, everything about what they put in that building because it's everything that we needed. I mean, that really is a good checklist, friends, to go down and just see in terms of like a performance company, the kinds of spaces that we really need to operate. And that's really completely what is missing from the Perkins and Will project is none of that, except down below one rehearsal space. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lindsay. And Uzair, I think that's the last hand I see, which is good. We're good on timing, so please go ahead.
Thank you. I would also agree that the Gar Architects, in terms of street activation, by far does the best out of the three. I think Perkins and Will actually kind of they both have this, one of the architects said it earlier, Eddie creating kind of layout where people get pulled into the space and then brought back out in terms of activation. I think what Grimshaw was most successful at was the gallery wall, which will also turn into you know, your pre-function space ahead of any event, but in terms of the parklet and how drawing people out into that space during normal business hours, or even using it as a pre-function space, I do not feel it's as successful. This is strictly speaking in terms of urban activation and not the functionality of the buildings, though. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Uzair. Okay, Lindsay, your hand is still up. Did you want to make one last thought before we move on to?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'll click it. Sorry.
Not to worry. Okay, so excellent comments, and this is precisely what we were hoping to hear. So
I have one more comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew. Sure.
I know this isn't part of the criteria, but I have to say, when I saw the Perkins and Will design, kind of took my breath away. As someone who has participated in theater, seen lots of theater, have theater as my background, it has both like an ancient quality to it and a very contemporary quality to it that to me harkens back to the beginning of theater in the Greek period. And so I really love that design. And I think that a lot of the concerns that Lindsay brought up may be able to be dealt with in that design. I also wanted to comment on the issue of the cafe, because I believe that we've had a lot of challenges incorporating cafes into city properties. So, you know, hopefully basics might come back and that could be a solution. But in terms of the city, you know, creating a coffee house or something like that, we've tried that before and it has been problematic.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, so we will move on because these were really excellent comments on urban activation. And I wanted to move to the site planning because I think there was a few thoughts regarding the parking and the green space and the open space and whether it's needed or not. So a little bit of further information. Right now, there are some tenants that are in the crossroads space that are required to have certain parking. I think if we're moving forward with the new Playhouse, it's a conversation that we would have with them. But I think for purposes of the visioning exercise, we wanted to make sure that there was accommodation for the parking that they have as part of their lease. But that is not to say that it could not go away potentially in the future. There's a lot of variables, but we just wanted to make sure to be able to accommodate them if need be. And then with respect to the open space, It is not a requirement at all for the new Playhouse facility. I think it is very much in line with some of the other city goals for climate and environment, and adding green space, and especially tree canopies that are meant to sort of help with our rising temperatures and other things that are going on in the city with new development. But it is certainly not a requirement, and so that component could certainly wax or wane as any of these three schemes develop. I would also remind everybody that Grimshaw was proposing a green roof as part of their proposal. So in terms of the site design, we can look at that. And then Perkins and Will was proposing some other rooftop solar as part of their design. But let's talk a little bit more about the site planning itself. I think the key components would be certainly a clear demarcation of entry sequence for those who have never arrived before. Is there the ability to park in the rear and get to the front of the building? Because a lot of the parking for this site is in the rear. Although we do have two city parking lots, one that is just to the west at Kings Road parking garage, and then to the south at City Hall's automated parking structure. So the good news is that there is a lot of parking in close proximity, but we do want to make sure there's some thoughts given to arrival through rideshare, if not parking. And then of course, in terms of the function, to Lindsay's point, there has to be a clear methodology for bringing in, whether it's costuming, equipment, stage materials. We want to make sure that there was useful thought put into any design to make sure that the actual staging of performances could be handled relatively easily. So if there's thoughts and comments about the site plan, please raise your hand. You know, the Perkins and Will project was proposing a pocket park that kind of bled into the forecourt, whereas the BAR architects had more of a forecourt garden experience that bled out to the curb. And then the Grimshaw proposal had a little green space entry as part of a side entry into the Playhouse. So for those who didn't join us last time, that's a little bit of a recap. So hands-on site planning strategies. Rogerio, do you want to kick us off, followed by Andrew?
Sure, I'll give it a try. I mean, Rick, if we take the parking out as a game changer for all three schemes, but
Yes.
given what we're given, you know, the Perkins and Will project, you know, the courtyards next to parking, I mean, it's an edge condition that's resolvable, but it's never great. You know, in terms of like the Perkins, I'm having a hard time sort of commenting on site planning without commenting on the planning that went into the building. So of these three schemes, the Grimshaw project is the most evolved and most realistic. The Perkins and Will project has some really great ideas, but it feels like it needs to evolve. And in that regards, you know, the outdoor, what I like about the outdoor spaces and how, you know, it just kind of flows into the courtyard, into the pocket park, it flows into the entry area. The parking at the back seemed to make the bar project and the Grimshaw project more successful. The parking on the side sort of made the Perkins and Will project a little bit difficult because that edge condition is often hard to resolve. But like I mentioned in the last comment, I do like how that lower work area spills out and that space could be used interactively for casual performances. Yeah, I'll leave it there for right now and come back.
Okay. And I thank you for bringing up the term evolve, because I think regardless of which of the teams moves forward, we expect that their effectively going to start from scratch. And I think part of this process is that we're trying to discern their thought process, the types of things they take into consideration when they produce the vision, and how well we feel they would be able to evolve their design. I don't want to necessarily say it would be a complete start over, but I think you're right that likely we would work on the parking question, other specific programming components that the arts division may have, or our facilities division. So there's going to be some changes to the requirements for the building going forward when it becomes real, and so it will evolve. But given that, I think we're really interested in what that evolution would have to be. Where are the areas that are perhaps not working great? Where are the signature moments that are working well that you would hope would be elaborate on, perhaps? Okay, so with that, Andrew, followed by Esther.
Yeah, I concur with Rogerio and a lot of his points. I really also, I know this may be not part of the discussion right now, but I do really like that the integration of the rehearsal space with the parklet for Perkins and Will. I think in terms of the bar architect project, I like the idea that they came up with that bump out, or bump in, I guess it would be, in terms of drop off for Uber and Lyft and so forth. I think that's very helpful. And I like the idea on Bar and Grimshaw having the parking in the back.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Esther.
Thanks. There was something that came up last week that I thought was it was something that I was reluctant to express, but I think someone else did it very elegantly or eloquently, which is the kind of stair feature in the outdoor lobby of the Perkins and Will project. And in terms of site planning, not feeling that was an equitable solution with disabled or differently abled people. So that I have to say that really stuck out to me and was a cause for concern. And I have to say, I think the vine screen with the planters on pulleys is kind of gimmicky and potentially, I think both of those things, the vine screen on the pulleys and the green roof in the Grimshaw scheme, are maintenance challenges. And I'm particularly concerned about the Grimshaw large green roof because of our water conditions or lack thereof. And they didn't seem to really have put a lot of thought into how to provide that water. And I suppose, I don't know, they didn't have very many restrooms in there either. So gray water system might not even support it. But those are just two concerns in terms of kind of the landscape development on those two. I'm also just on the Grimshaw project, the gallery space concerns me as a pre-function space. And I think one of the differences between Grimshaw and Bar is basically the presence of an interior conditioned lobby or an exterior lobby in the Bar scheme. And from a sustainability standpoint, putting some of that space outside where you don't have to condition it, use energy and other things seems like a good move in Southern California. I mean, this strikes me as Bar's scheme, and to some extent Perkins Will, feels like it has a sense of place in Southern California because of the connection outdoors. And I don't feel that with the Grimshaw scheme. I think it's somewhat placeless, actually, and could be in just about any place. But in terms of the other, I have a question that's I can't figure out which category it goes in, and maybe Rick, you could help me with this. In terms of functionality, like Lindsay said, having space for, there doesn't seem to be backstage space in some of these schemes. And there was some mention at some point about potentially places for workshops and set building and things. How does that factor across what was given to the architects?
Yeah, Esther, that's a really good question. And I think the arts division was able to provide some initial input about sort of general approaches, certain spaces that were musts, but I don't think we've had the chance yet to really deeply program the space. And when Lindsay brought up last week some of the workshop spaces and areas for office. I think those are very, very excellent points to have a highly functioning space. And so it may be that, we have to look at adjusting the program. The city council has given us sort of a budget cap. So in the end, there may be some challenging choices about what's in and what's out, and perhaps the wants and desires versus the needs become a little bit difficult to distinguish between at certain points, but that's, we'll have to see how that plays out. Ideally, if we can resolve the parking, there's room for a little bit bigger facility, which then could accommodate a little bit more of these spaces that would be desired. But then we'd have to figure out how to pay for it. So, these are all really good questions. And I think before this were to go forward, there would be a deeper programming exercise for a final project with whichever team is selected. And I think it would also then go through a community input process where we hear more about some of these programmatic spaces from the community as well before it's finalized. So I guess that's a long way of answering that we're not quite sure exactly what's going to be in or out yet. All right, Martin, I see you're up next.
Yeah, just quickly, I think in the Perkins and Will design, the use of there's so much open space, almost 3/4 of the site really has led to their programming difficulties, and I think that the resolution of that for them will help resolve some of that. I do like the parking in the back where it leads to kind of a direct loading situation, although that parking on the side, you can feed directly into the rehearsal space on the first floor in the Perkins and Will project. But I think integration of where the parking is in terms of how it feeds into kind of loading sets of whatever the space needs at the time, I think is an important way to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, I see Andrew, one last thought before we move on to the next topic.
Yes, I just want to respond to a couple of the comments that were made. And regarding the staircase, and I know that Lindsay brought this up last time too for the Perkins and Will project. And obviously that's a big concern. But I did notice that they have a sort of exterior lobby and an interior lobby. And in the interior lobby on the first floor, there is an elevator that I think there's an elevator there. So that would probably address accessibility issues. The other thing about the Perkins and Will, there was a talk about the space, and that rehearsal space that they have designed is extraordinarily large. And I think it could also function as a place to create sets and storage, because basically the rehearsal space is actually larger than the stage space. And with the stage space, you would have seating. So that would even take up less space. So I think that would give you sort of a good rehearsal space in the first floor, and also some possible room for workshop.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. I'm not seeing any other hands, so we'll move on to our next topic. Let's see here. All right, now I know for some this may be a little bit more challenging who are not into sustainability, but maybe Jason, this is where you get to contribute. Each of the three firms had some very specific strategies with respect to sustainability or climate responsive design. I think there was a clear distinction between some that used nature and sort of natural daylighting, natural ventilation, spaces that opened up indoor outdoors, versus perhaps conditioned space that were done so in a more eco-friendly way. Some used more mechanical devices like solar panels or moving shades or screens that wrapped, or in one case even some growing, some plants that hung down. We had a green roof, so maybe we can talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of what's proposed. And Jason, I see your hand up right on time. So you're up.
Well, I think this is a challenging topic, sustainability strategies. I just want to say, first off and foremost, all three of them, let's say for lack of a better word, checked off the boxes for certain items. All three show renewable energy on the roof. Granted, Grimshaw has a green roof with opportunities for renewable energy. I think it made it very challenging to like evaluate each of them individually and try to say one is much further into the sustainability than others. One of the things I was hoping to see in the presentation would be things focused more on community resilience and flexibility for adaptation. Some of those things really weren't talked about. And I don't know if City of West Hollywood has put out spaces for cooling centers in the future and those sort of things. And that's where I'm going with on that. But really, sustainability, to bring it to 30,000 foot, is all about community. And that's why I kind of step back a little bit in the sustainability, and I'd love to hear what everyone else has to say, and I'd respond some more. But really engaging the community and providing a place for theater and arts is really the priority one. I think secondary, that flexibility for future adaptation with, hotter days, things where you might have spaces where cool centers and things of that nature, if it was meant to be positioned here. But quite honestly, I think the activation of, let's say, more natural, softer spaces that are using materials that I think they're going along with what you want to receive. But I also think it's being applied very sterilized, quite honestly. And I think part of it is because it hasn't been developed conceptually in a way that it's really just, for lack of a better word, it's all painted on sustainability strategies at this point. But I'll turn over my time, and I'm happy to give more detailed reflection after that.
Okay, thank you, Jason. I think you raise a point about different ways of thinking about sustainability and resilience, and certainly the city has no shortage of ways that they could use a facility, a city facility, whether it's emergency cooling centers. Yes, we do that. We have other emergency operations that it could be used. We have public events and festivals going down Santa Monica Boulevard that I could see it being used. It could be used for press conferences and voting centers. There's no shortage of civic uses, I think, for a facility like this. But in the end, I think if you were to ask Rebecca and her team in the arts division, they're ready to program this 365 days a year. And so I think we have no doubt that it will be, primarily, overwhelming majority of the time, an arts facility for arts programming. But that's not to say that there isn't, a community or civic component, and that may be where some of the outdoor space comes in as well, where you can maybe have some shared programming or opportunities if the space is large enough. Perhaps that's a possibility. So I'm glad you raised that. And in terms of specific sustainability strategies, I agree with you. Yes, we want to stay away from the sort of additive approach to typical checklist items that you add to a building, but instead actually look very strongly at orientation and materials and passive approaches to daylighting and thermal exhaust. I think the Grimshaw proposal is actually using some some vertical exhaust. I'm not recalling that specifically on the other two, although it wouldn't be surprising that that was in there. But let's see, Brian, I think you had some thoughts on this as well.
So my comment's going to be very fast because Jason just said something very close to what I was going to say, which is diagrams tell a story that is a checklist of we've got our solar on top or the green roof or the sun comes from here. It is really important that there be a way that this is reviewed on a technical level as to what you actually get out of it, because the loads that we're talking about of these buildings, whether or not they're internally load dominated or externally load dominated, is a huge difference on how we should be talking about the systems that they put in place in each of these proposals. And having done a number of award submissions over the years and done a lot of these diagrams, putting the arrows that show air movement, showing where the sun is coming is not the same as saying the effect of this is this. And the only reason I didn't take my hand down is I just want to caution everyone here taking these things at face value. It really takes a lot of additional study and analysis to see if these things actually do the things that they say they do. And Jason is 100% right with what he said. So that's my comment on that one.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I would just say that sort of 2 points. One is, regardless of which team is selected to move forward, there would be energy modeling and an energy consultant as part of the team that would be working with them in the design from the outset, so that the project itself gets shaped in a meaningful way, in every possible way, whether it's orientation or light or ventilation or materiality. I think that's going to be a big part of going forward. And then second point is that, you know, we asked a lot of these three firms in terms of giving us their conceptual approaches. And so we also didn't want to abuse their time in asking for exceedingly detailed descriptions and calculations and analyses, but more of just a larger approach of the type of things that they thought could be achieved with this. So whether it's stormwater capture or their approach to material selection or planting pallets or roofscapes, I think all three of them what we asked them to do, which was to at least identify their thought process of things they thought were important to any building, and they would then, using that thought process, make sure they're doing it in detail and to the level that both Brian and Jason mentioned. So Uzair, I think you had some thoughts on this.
Thanks. Yeah, I would definitely echo what Jason and Brian said. It's easy to say, you know, we're going to do PV this and green roof that, and if it actually pencils out. And as Esther pointed out during the presentations, a green roof adds a lot of weight to the roof, especially in California, and trying to put California native plants up there. So one strategy, which I think is not really being looked at by the group just yet, is that the Perkins Will building is absolutely, conditioned space is absolutely tiny compared to the other ones. And I think that reducing the amount of conditioned space is going to help with energy efficiency. Similarly, like, you don't have to do as much lighting. I know that there's other issues with the building, but I think Perkins Will takes a small footprint approach to this project and utilizes the benefits of Los Angeles's outdoor weather. I also think their use of timber and CMU is smart, and their reduced glazing, so there's not going to be a ton of heat gain on the project, and kind of using naturally insulated materials makes a lot of sense. And I think that's, you know, initial building construction and kind of design, going back to the very, very basics, would help life cycle sustainability rather than, you know, the green roof and the solar, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Uzair. Those are really good points. And I know that was a big emphasis for Perkins and Will was the smaller footprint, and that was part of their thinking for this particular aspect. So I appreciate you reminding everybody about that. Okay, I'm not seeing any other. Oh, Esther, I'm sorry. One more thought on this.
I just a couple quick thoughts. One is more and more LID strategies really are focusing on capture and reuse of stormwater, whether it's the most cost efficient solution or not. I just can't. I mean, I think you need to have an attitude and an approach to this. You can't ignore it. And then really simple, the planting and for biodiversity purposes, for our future, we really should be focusing on, some kind of a designed plant community that includes sufficient natives, or I'm not going to say all natives, but I think natives really need a place in every landscape to support the other species on the planet locally. And the last thing is super simple. Shade trees in these open spaces. I don't really understand like the nostalgia for the palm trees that I felt like was discussed, and it's just any and every project where you expect to see people, where you are programming people outside, there has got to be some high quality shade there. And as if there's the proportions and opportunity for that to be provided by trees, all the better. So that's really future reference probably as these evolve.
Great, thank you. Yes, and I don't know that there is a definite affinity for the palm trees, so that's definitely something we can look at going forward as a component that maybe can be removed. All right, so we'll move to our next, which I think is a very important component, which is the programming and flexibility in the performance. And I know we saw a number of different approaches to that. Just to remind those who are, or at least to recap for those who weren't with us last time, two of the proposals, the BAR and Grimshaw, proposed a Playhouse component on the ground level. The BAR proposal had the main performance space in the front off of a forecourt, whereas the Grimshaw proposal had the Playhouse towards the back of the property off of a lobby space in the front. The Perkins and Will approach was a little bit different. They moved the main performance space to the second floor. And that was a big part of their analysis and their diagramming to make that work. So I think as part of this discussion, we're really interested in hearing about the location, the configuration, the ease of servicing, both from a performer's standpoint and a technical standpoint in terms of loading and getting materials and stage sets and other things in and out, seating, tucking in and out. There's a lot to talk about in terms of the performance space itself. And I think also in this discussion, we should understand and talk a little bit about the pre-show and post-show milling and spilling out spaces, even intermission if there's a performance that's longer. We have to consider up to 99 seat sizing and how that that spillover or milling space might function as well. So with that, I will open it up to some discussion. Brian, I see your hand up first.
So yeah, I was quick on raising my hand on this one because I think that this is, to me, one of the most important, if not the most important pieces of this is, does this investment go towards a building that is usable and functional and benefits the public good? Because it's a lot of money, and when we spend those dollars, we want to make sure it goes towards something that works. Sort of design by design, there are things aesthetically that I like in each of these projects. I sort of left to right again. I think the Perkins and Will project is the nicest looking for me personally, just kind of aesthetically. I think it's compelling and it's exciting, but that's all done at it's all done in a way that takes away from the actual performance space. Elevating that space to the second floor, while it affords making a more compact building, it completely removes a functional back of house space, which is a necessity for performance, for load in, to have wings, to have the ability to do a typical style stage performance. It works really well for theater in the round, without a doubt. But I think as far as the diversity of types of performance that can be done there, there is a limit because of the functionality. I think that in addition to the elevated stair creating issues for people, for disabled people's coming to the building, and about the equity of that, I think it's also for the performers too. Disabled performers can have a really hard time using the space because you have to utilize stairs to get to the performance area. To load in from a wing or to do load in from the back, it requires using those stairs, which is, I don't think, a great message about how we value people. It's not just about guests or patrons, it's also about the performers. That said, there's a lot of good things in this project also. I think that one thing would have to be addressed if they were to move forward with that. The BAR proposal, programmatically, there's a lot going on here that I don't understand. It is nice that the space is on the ground floor and it opens into the courtyard, but I think that there's some real practical problems with that, especially given the adjacency to a really busy street. You know, bifolding or sliding doors are really hard to deal with acoustically, and I just don't know how you can effectively do that without a tremendous amount of money to seal that space, to get it to function with those doors that are open in and out of the courtyard. It's also, I think, programmatically, the entry sequence, the way you go to the box office in an uncovered way and then have to enter the building into a very small vestibule and then make a left turn, does not work very well as an entry sequence. And the second floor does not work at all. The scale of the spaces does not work. The amount of space dedicated to some of the most expensive square footage, which is restroom space, does not work. There are, I think, big kind of systemic issues with the planning of this building. And I think how they arrive at the courtyard that is at the scale that it is at is through a lot of problems with the scale of their spaces and the functionality of the spaces. As far as programming and performance, the building that succeeds the best is the Grimshaw building. There's a functional back of house, there's a functional theater space, there is a compact lobby, and there's a compact series of support spaces that are in the appropriate adjacencies to the actual performance space. As far as functionality in a typical theater performance venue, the Grimshaw building is the only one that I think is meeting that criteria. I agree with Esther on the courtyard and the entry sequence. It seems a little awkward and clumsy right now, but I think that could require that a little bit of rework could get you there. But as far as the programming and the flexibility of the space, I think the Grimshaw one is the one that's working the best. The Perkins and Will one struggles with that second floor theater in the back of house. And the BAR one, I think there's just too many questions unanswered about whether or not these spaces are the right sizes. And that's how they're getting to the successful things, is by things being out of proportion in the rest of the programming. And that's all my comments on that. This one was important to me.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. You do raise an interesting question about proportionality, and I did want to point out that I believe the Perkins and Will and Grimshaw proposals only had 3 public toilets, water closets, and the bar proposal, I think, was up to 6. Now, granted, I think there's a lot of wasted space, but I think in terms of size, it's going to be closer, maybe a little bit smaller, but closer to reality of what's going to be needed for a 99-seat space plus performers and staff. So I just would point that out, that I think all of them will have to evolve in that respect on a functionality side.
If I could, sorry, Rick,
Sure.
if I could just follow up on that, because I think this is a really important point. We just completed a 300-seat theater that had fewer stalls than what are represented in the BAR proposal. And just by the visual test, the restrooms in this proposal are almost the exact same size as the performance space, just in area when you compare the footprint of those things. And so I would say you might be right on the stall count, but the overall efficiency and area of the building, something just seems out of whack to me. Then that's part of the reason I had that response to it.
Sure, no, understood. And also, West Hollywood is moving quickly towards a more inclusive, gender neutral policy for restrooms. So I think going forward, that's something that whichever team selected, we're going to want them to explore that type of a setup, which does have some functional and spatial special conditions. All right, Lindsay, I see your hand up.
Well, thank you, Brian, for all of your really insightful comments. I agree totally. The Grimshaw Architects proposal was the only one that met the requirements of a performing, troupe. And I am grateful that they have the experience, to understand the needs that performers have. I liked the bar architect's openness, but I hear what you're saying, Brian, with regards to the sliding glass door. That's really problematic, and if it's going to be closed, it is hard to get in. I'm involved with a theater that has that exact same kind of scenario. They've got a garage door that opens vertically into their space, and then they also have a side door, and so when the weather's inclement or cold, they close it, and then it is hard to get people in. You're absolutely correct. So I'm just going to leave it there. There's going to be absolutes that performers are going to need, and I believe it is now a regulation that gender neutral bathrooms are part of what we need in WeHo. I think it's part of the law now, isn't it? So thanks.
Well, we're working at the state level to get it adopted formally.
Okay.
But I think locally we're committed to it, and I think that's why we would say that a new facility must have it. Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts? I'm curious if. I'm sorry, Uzair, I see your hand up.
There, thanks. Just one note, I am, a construction project manager, but I did participate in theater quite a lot, especially in the high school days on the tech side. So I know I don't have the experience that a lot of the folks on the call do, but definitely some things which I saw, which were interesting. I think the load in, and especially being somebody who was on the tech side and not having the load in part of it, I think is absolutely huge. And I think, unfortunately, Perkins and Will with the upper floor performance space, it just does not work. And possibly there's something which you can switch that in the future. But the efficiency of the bar architect's plan, just again, echoing Brian, just did not make sense to me. And allocation of so much of the space to corridors and perimeter space just felt odd. And that is going to be very expensive space to build. And the restroom flow just did not make sense to me either, where you enter up the stairs and you are essentially in the restrooms. Again, really did not make a lot of sense to me. And also having restrooms on different floors as a performance space, I know that's very common, especially going underground, but putting them on the upper level, just it didn't really make sense to me either. But just a few initial thoughts there.
Yeah, thank you, Uzair. I would also be curious to hear some thoughts about the milling space, the spillover space. Lindsay in particular, maybe Brian, how essential is that component if it's for intermission or pre or post performance? How should we be thinking about that?
Well, where's the drink?
Good question.
Right? I mean, that's the very first question that people are asking is, where's the bathroom and where's the bar? And so, at some point there's got to be, milling around space, a place to go get a drink, a place to go pee. And so that's really the first thought of anything like that. My only concern is when you give more, I guess you call it unconditioned space, outdoor space, than is needed at the expense of needed space to do the work. That's my only thought. So okay, thanks.
Yeah, well, I think the reason I ask is if we look at Perkins and Will, for example, I could see how you could easily add a second elevator, maybe rotated 90 degrees to the one elevator they've proposed, that could work very well for both the performers to get upstairs and backstage. It also could be used for bringing stage materials and other things up to the second floor. But in doing that, it would decrease the size of that terrace, which is their spillover space, their milling space. So I could see, the same thing with the BAR architects, that they could move their walls in and close the bathroom a little bit smaller and create a much larger second floor and have a much more functional rehearsal space. I think, Lindsay, you brought that up in the presentation. So in terms of the evolution of these, I'm wondering about that outdoor component.
Yeah, let me speak to the Perkins and Will idea. So the whole notion of where people are spilling out to really is going to be around wherever the bar is or a set of bathrooms is. People are going to either go down or they're going to go up, And most in the theaters that I've been into that are on the second level, the first thing people do is go downstairs. And because generally there's not this kind of space, and that would be a question. So how much space is there in this Perkins and Will? Is that 50 people? Is that 65 people? What are we really looking at? And that might be a question, also with the Grimshaw architects proposal is, where are people milling about? The bar architects is very clear. You've got that big outdoor space in the front. But yeah, milling around and looking for the bar will be the first thing on people's minds.
Sounds like that's a key programmatic component we'll have to look at for the final, whether it's a permanent space or something with carts and other things that could be brought in and set up.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly what like San Diego Symphony does and what other outdoor organizations that do outdoor stuff do, is they just bring the carts right in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in that case, I think having a little bit larger outdoor space really fosters that kind of gathering and intermediate space. So that's interesting. All right. Uzair, your hand is still up. Did you have other thoughts?
I just had one question to kind of the experts on the panel. The double height at some of the performance areas, is that desired? Is that required in a theater like this? Or is that something which could be utilized for a different function, perhaps?
I'm sorry.
Lindsay should answer that.
Lindsay and Andrew, I'd like your thoughts.
Yes, space is really necessary for a whole host of reasons, starting with hanging of instruments, sound, all of it. And 2 floors is minimum. The 30-foot that Grimshaw was offering was wonderful. It gave me goosebumps. And so, yeah, we like spaciousness because remember, the human body is the instrument, and we need space for it to perform and not rely necessarily on electronics. I think a lower ceiling is more pub, bar, rock and roll venue for me, but yeah.
So Lindsay, in both cases with Grimshaw and BAR, they had a sort of low to high shape, almost like an L shape in section.
Yes.
Whereas Perkins and Will had just a single double height volume for the whole thing. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I've been in rooms that it works either way. All right, it does work either way. If looking at the Grimshaw side view, so they'd push the bleachers back into the wall to do something in the round, and then work people, on all sides. I guess similarly with BAR, it's built into Perkins and Will that way, and that the Perkins and Will space is gorgeous in that regard, in that you have pretty much a clear view site for a whole rectangle. What you're not getting, though, is anything from the top. And that's what I sort of liked in the BAR proposal, was that, if you were either in that rehearsal space or in that room that was on the other side, that mechanical room, on the second floor, that was a balcony, if you have windows, etc. So, and those are wonderful places to be, certainly for a booth.
Okay. Andrew, did you have any thoughts?
I just want to concur. Height is important in a theater.
Okay. And Uzair, another comment? Okay. All right, so not seeing any other hands on programming and performance flexibility. Let's see if we can move on. So Uzair has been offering some thoughts on the facility itself, but another part of his expertise on the construction management side is looking on a daily basis at cost and construction methodologies. And so we had asked each of the three teams to provide a preliminary cost opinion. It wasn't something that we circulated because these are just initial snapshots, but we did ask Uzair to see if he had any just overarching thoughts about how these teams were allocating cost to certain aspects of their design relative to the design itself. And so I had asked him if he could just give the group an overview of what he was seeing in terms of how each of the three teams sort of were allocating their budget, and if he had any concerns or if he thought they were sort of well done, certain teams. So Uzair, we'll give you a few minutes to share your thoughts with the group on this particular topic.
Thanks, Rick. So yeah, we just did a quick look, and one of the quickest ways that we can do an analysis on this is we took the enclosed square footage, we took the site square footage, and we actually applied the specific categories and took a look at the dollar per square foot and saw if they had like kind of a correct spread or what we would anticipate in the project. And then we also went through a line by line and looked at the detail that was provided. Overall, everybody looked pretty good. I think BAR was carrying about 210, and I only looked at the construction level. I didn't really look below the line, but overall it looked like BAR was actually carrying somewhere around $215,000 more than they should have been. They do include an allowance for stairs, which is captured in their concrete number, I believe. So we'd have to do some clarifications on that. But it kind of brings them to a construction level of Grimshaw, who had the largest building being about 3.2 on the construction number, BAR being at just under 4 million, and Perkins Will being just under 4 million. Now, I would actually rank those numbers from least realistic to most realistic in that order as well. Grimshaw's estimate looked extremely light. Their plumbing costs, their mechanical costs, and their electrical systems cost was okay. But I just felt like everything was extremely light, especially when compared to everything else. They didn't have a ton of money in there for structure. It just felt like this was way too light of a building. Them having the largest building at 5,200 enclosed square feet and having a construction budget of $3.2 million, that was $623 a square foot. And these are very, very compact, small buildings. And I know that dollar per square foot seems very high, but that's what we were looking at. So I actually had, I would expect the Grimshaw building to be one of the most expensive, sure, just because it was the largest and it came in the lightest. So them being able to hold on to a realistic budget and actually designed to a budget gives me a little bit of concern. And also, I would say that I looked through their systems. I'll go through some of the details, and it wasn't like they were using anything significantly less expensive, right? These are all pretty much aligned. BAR came through the middle. Their estimate seemed a little bit convoluted. There were some interesting elements which were carried in different places, but overall their estimate was good. They were at $883 per square foot for the enclosed portion of it. So it seemed about right. Seemed like, they did miss a few things here and there. Their electrical systems were only $45 a square foot. And for a theater with the lighting capacity you'll need and electrical capacity you'll need and flexibility, redundancy, $45 a square foot is just not sufficient for anything like that. Just looking through their estimate, other than that, it just seemed, middle of the road, nothing else stood out. Perkins & Will seemed actually the most realistic. They've done some interesting things. They included, and then Rick, I know you had some questions about this, all of their interior partitions was under the interior materials and finishes side. They had the most backup, and their backup looked extremely thorough and realistic for the market conditions. They are showing their entire material, their structure actually under section I, which is their exterior materials and finishes. So therefore there was no exterior framing, but overall I felt like they had the most complete estimate, and they had a lot of the detail in there, and I was able to review the detail and felt like they were the most covered. And frankly, I felt like they provided the most realistic cost, but that cost was at $933 per square foot only on their enclosed portion. So it kind of just goes to show that these are fairly large dollar per square foot projects. And although Grimshaw shows that they are the cheapest, I have a hard time believing that estimate.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you. That's the type of overview I think we were hoping for, just, high level at this point. One thing I would say is I believe there was a little miscommunication with the BAR proposal, because I believe they included their professional fees in with their cost opinion. And so that definitely factors into how they sort of allocated certain numbers. But I think just from a general standpoint, the Perkins & Will was significantly less enclosed space. I think it was about 20% smaller building enclosed than Grimshaw. I think BAR was somewhere in the middle. And so if we were to sort of extrapolate that, Perkins & Will, I think, went for a higher quality material and finish in a smaller footprint. And I think the Grimshaw one, we'd probably have to dive a little bit deeper, because they did have much more square footage and yet seemed to be proposing a very high quality building with some of the materials they were proposing. And so I think that would take some additional analysis, but I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Yeah, just one comment if I could add, Rick.
Sure.
All of these buildings have the same base requirements. And unfortunately, as much as you shrink the building, you still have those expensive base requirements. And that's what the Perkins Will building is feeling, that even though it has, it is a smaller footprint, it still has the most expensive elements and all of the baseline elements that you are required to have in the building.
Right. And that's why their price per foot would be the highest as well, because of that. So, okay. Well, I think what we'd like to do now is take some comments from the public who's listening in, some of our community members, and then we'll come back and have a final discussion amongst the group, kind of zooming out a little bit more. So we're doing fine on time for the moment. So if any members of the public want to comment, if you could try raising your hand. It looks like there may be some issues with our raised hand feature. I see Lynn Hoopengarner. Did you want to share some thoughts. If you could unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you to all of the committee members. I think you've had a really great conversation and elicited a lot of things and notes that I have made. I'll just kind of go down my list here quickly. I can't agree more on the restrooms. You know, yes, it's a girl thing, but a lack of number of stalls with an event space is just going to be really problematic. And having said that, event space, I know this is a theater and I know this is arts, but I think to Rick's point, we really need to think about it as an event space and think about it, especially daytime programming, children's events, maybe seniors events. I think there's so much we can do, especially being across from City Hall, that this could become a really important space for a lot of different functions, and perhaps just making sure that we're being as broad as possible in our thinking as to its uses would be really helpful. Not an architect, but just one of the thoughts is to take that courtyard space and cantilever the second story more, so that it creates an awning and incorporates the space in a way that maybe gives it, you know, some cover and also adds more real estate to the second floor.
Lynn, which scheme are you talking about?
Well, more on that one, I'm talking more about the bar scheme.
Okay.
I did like the concept on the hold on, I gotta minimize the little thingy. The first one, the Perkins and Will, in terms of the spilling out into the parking lot so for additional event space. And my thought there was you could have a, you know, an awning that could come out to protect it a little bit. I will second Esther's comments about the shade trees. I think that's an important piece of this. And no, none of us like to take out trees, but palm trees just really don't add a lot of the shade that we could use. I think more thinking in terms of flex space. I realize that there's acoustic issues with it, but you know, the concept, and this is back to the pre and post event space, to the extent that, you know, you can have doors open so that the event space itself can still be part of the post event space for people to mingle and autographs to be signed and things like that, is a concept to maybe consider. The other thing is taking that parking space and incorporating it into the green space, doing some pavers where, you know, you have grass between the pavers, et cetera, that especially at night when the retail is closed, that the parking could somehow be incorporated into the overflow space might be something to consider. And on cost, I'd like us to make sure as a city that we don't just factor in construction cost, but we look at operating costs, because that can be far more significant than the actual construction costs if you don't do it right. And I know, Rick, you're on, you know, all over this, and that's one of the reasons for a lot of the work on the environmental components, but I think it should be an explicit consideration and not just an implicit consideration. Mm-hmm. Just to reiterate, I think the event overflow space is critical, and that's back to activating the space along the street environment, having that all important beverage opportunity, but making that beverage opportunity somehow, some way activate the space during the day. I see this as a potentially active space, you know, 18, 20 hours a day, if we do it right. And I guess those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Lynn. Really, really insightful comments. Manny Rodriguez, glad to see you join us.
Hi, Rick. Yes, I'm glad I'm here. I really got a lot out of this. hearing everybody's expertise. It was very informative and educational, and I appreciate everybody's really constructive observations and opinions. I just wanted to just make a suggestion that maybe you'd consider moving forward, in that, there is a lot of experts on this committee, and we have designers and architects and urban planners and art folk. But what's missing, I think, as part of a committee is operations people, a producer, a director, a stage manager maybe, that could have a kind of insights, day-to-day operation of a theater in a creative kind of way that could be useful. So, when the council chambers was built, there were a lot of mistakes built into it. And it had a lot of promise to do a lot of things. And it really hasn't functioned that well because of things that may have been obvious to someone involved in production and operations from the beginning. So I hope that you'll consider that moving forward. Otherwise, I really enjoyed hearing everybody. It was very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Manny. Really appreciate those comments. I think as part of the full consultant team going forward, we'll be looking at not only stage management and operations, which I think are critical, but also acoustics, lighting, technology, integration. I think these are all critical to the proper functioning of the performance spaces, both for the performers and the attendees. I think it's got to work from both directions. So we absolutely hear you, and I think that will be a big part of the process going forward. So thanks for that.
Rick, I'm sorry. There's no hand thingy. I'm going to chime in here 1 minute. One of the other things that I thought a lot about as everyone was speaking is our old auditorium, and how when we had planning commission and city council meetings there, how the public could integrate in and out, and how there was a flow, and it was a real community space. And this is our opportunity to, in some respects, replace our auditorium, because we don't have it anymore. So just a thought.
Yeah, thank you, Lynn. And I think the challenge here is sort of serving two key components. When it's a performance space in a more formal setting, how can it be set up in the best possible way to facilitate that performance taking place? But on the other hand, in the informal times, how can it be relaxed and flexible enough that you can have that wander in, spill out type of experience that we did have at the old auditorium? And that's a real challenge for the design team going forward, because I think we would love the ability to do both, but in the end, this is going to be an arts house. It is a art space and a performance space, and I think if anything, we'd want to make sure that it works first and foremost as that. And if we do allow for some informality, I think that's even a bonus. But we don't want to lose sight that it will be sort of a community art house. Lindsay, I see your hand up.
Hi, thank you all really for those wonderful comments. Theaters function like a magnet in a city. And in terms of drawing in not only audiences, but also drawing in productions. And many of the productions that I imagine the Playhouse will draw in the future will be produced in another location and then brought into West Hollywood. Those directors have very clear ideas about what their staging is and what their requirements are. And so, that's really one of the backdrop things that we're thinking about, as a presenter and having a space, is how to accommodate the myriad of asks that directors will have in the future, and also for dance companies and music acts, etc. I think it's really important to name that, you know, this is a professional theater space. It's going to be a 99 equity house, a seat house, and that the city has a lot of spaces, Plummer Park, you know, Fiesta Hall, etc., where we can accommodate other kinds of, if you will, events. But it's really important, you know, if we're going to build a playhouse, that we build a playhouse and make it as flexible as we can. But remember, you know, ultimately what its function is supposed to be. So thanks.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you, Lindsay. Okay, I see a few other community members. Joy Tribble, did you want to add any comments? If not, that's perfectly fine. You're more welcome. I see there's Mike. I'm sorry, our hand functions aren't working, so that's why I'm calling on people. Okay. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Let me just scroll here. Okay, we have a few phone numbers with no names, so I can't call on them either. Okay, so I'm not seeing any more community members that would like to comment right now. So we thought we would go into sort of a final discussion here of the sort of question I guess I would pose to the group is, if we were to take any of these three and move forward, what would you say would be the absolute needs and what would be the wants that you would like to see integrated into the space? And I think we've covered a lot of it already, but I think this is a chance to sort of take them one by one. We'll go you know, in order, but we'll look at each of the three visions and sort of look at the question overall, if we were to move forward with this firm, what would be the marching orders that you would like to see, whether they evolve certain aspects, they rethink, you know, the signage in the marquee or the outdoor space, or develop the sidewalk in the public way more, or you know, make the bathroom smaller or larger. But I think what we're looking for is sort of your best advice to the city moving forward of what you think absolutely must be considered should each of these three move forward. Okay, so let's take them one at a time. Maybe let's start with the Perkins and Will proposal, and we heard a lot of great comments about this vision, some real strengths, but also some challenges with mobility and equity, but strengths on the sort of indoor outdoor, the urban activation, maybe a little work to be done on the parking component. So this is an opportunity to share some final thoughts or concerns or advocacy. So anybody want to start the conversation on Perkins and Will, should they move forward? Martin, I see your hand go up.
Thank you. Yes, for Perkins and Will, I think it's logistics, how you handle the interactions between the lower space and the upper space, I think is most important, and loading. So the interior, exterior spaces interaction as well. Okay.
And it sounded like there was, if I read the room, advocacy for perhaps a second elevator, another way to be more equitable for the performers to get up and down and loading. I think if.
Absolutely, yes. I think that's part of that.
Okay, thank you. Rogerio, your thoughts on Perkins and Will?
Yeah, you hit most of all the right comments already. For me, I would like to see an evolution of all those pre-function spaces. And, you know, Lindsay's comments when we reviewed this last time and her comments tonight have really made me look at this space differently. Functionally, the areas around the theater have to work. That one entrance from the pre-function area in front to the theater I remember the presenter mentioned that actors would be moving in and out of there and they would have to come up the side stair. And Lindsay pointed out that that was problematic, and I don't have the theater experience that I think she and Andrew have, but I mean, it was obvious to me that that was going to be challenging, and have 99 people come out of that door and then go down this staircase. This of the three schemes is my favorite scheme, but I see the issues. That's this. I really feel like the scheme needs another couple of evolutions before it gets there. I also, the greening in the front is nice, but I also see the opportunity of sort of these flexible banner systems that would incorporate signage in a dynamic way that evolves with the city, which evolves with the project. And then I also mentioned sort of that blurring the edge between the parking and the pocket park, I think is really important. So you don't feel like you're sitting next to a parking area. And in one way, I think this scheme is strongest in the fact that you could bring a truck and load it right into that area underneath, or unload into the area underneath. And from a functional point of view of the three schemes, this one seems to be the strongest in that regards. So those are things that I think would, I would like to see evolve with Perkins and Will.
Okay, and you touched on before the signage where the other two have very strong marquees and this one doesn't. What are your thoughts? You want to elaborate a little bit more on that?
I'm okay with it, actually. I understand the historical reference and sort of bringing that into, the theater, but I also like the idea that we could do a banner system, and that could be super colorful and dynamic and change depending on performance. So I'm okay with giving up the typical marquee by incorporating this sort of creative, banner. I could just imagine it being bright and colorful and engaging, and makes the building elevation dynamic.
Okay. Let's see, other thoughts. Who's there? I see your hand, followed by Esther.
I just wanted
Perkins
to
and
echo.
Will.
Just wanted to echo that as well. I think the programming needs a little bit of work, and there should be a study to be done to see if you flip the rehearsal space and the performance space, and if that actually works and brings benefit to the project. I do feel it's the most elegant of the buildings, and I actually love the indoor-outdoor usage of it and the small footprint of it. But the equity issue is huge for me, and also just some of the maintenance aspects.
Great, thank you. Esther, I see your hand up.
Yeah, on this one, I think there's some other views of the second floor outdoor pre-function space, or where you get your drink before you go pee, that are somewhat make the space look very more generous than in plan. It just doesn't look very generous to me, and I would advocate for. My sense is they were trying to design a super efficient building. And I would encourage them to really be more generous with that outdoor space, to really make it a space that's comfortable when everyone empties the theater, that everyone has a place to go. And it is, your bar line doesn't go down the stairs and around the corner. And I seem to recall that there were some serious concerns in the conversation last week about how things were going to move vertically. So maybe Uzair's comment about flipping what's happening on the floors would solve that. And then I really think that they need to take a much more serious look at the open space on the site. It's felt kind of decorative to me, and I think Rogerio has spoken a lot about the challenge of trying to make a parking area feel like it's part of that open space. So that's, those would be my caveats, is just more attention to the quality of the space. And then I also think they also were very limited on the public restrooms. And yes, I don't like spending my time waiting in line. I'd rather be at the bar. So those are my things.
Okay, and any thoughts on the public way, the sidewalk? Because I think they were the least aggressive, perhaps.
Well, I looked at the bar scheme, and we can talk about that, but You know, this, I don't know, I'm very interested in the city's attitude about how unique everyone's interface with the public right of way should be. And whether projects will be encouraged to come up with new, interesting and innovative uses of that space, or whether the city still has a kind of uniform treatment of the sidewalk and public right of way in mind. So I kind of, applaud a creative approach to that. And that's something, I think needs to be explored with whoever is selected.
Okay. Lindsay, followed by Brian.
Thanks, y'all. I'm staring at the blueprints, and they definitely drawn the smallest footprint of all the three proposals that we are looking at, and to a cost of a lot of function. I like the idea of pulling the theater down to the bottom, but to Andrew's point about opening the rehearsal space with those cantilever doors out, that's great. It is the same problematic function, though, that we had with the bar theater, in that they were going to use the same kind of doors. It's a really issue with the scissor lift and the whole idea that you would have to bring anything up. I mean, a grand piano. I'm just the whole idea of that just gives me chills. And so, yeah, that's what I have to say about that. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Lindsay. Well, Lindsay, let me ask you something. Do you think that if they made the building footprint a little bit bigger and had a formal, I don't know if you want to call it freight elevator or integrated lift at the back, that you would be less concerned if they were able to do that?
Yeah, going back to one of the comments that we heard earlier, I believe it was Lynn. It was a great comment about bringing a cantilevered roof over the parking area, of this particular design, for instance, and you'd buy all of a sudden a lot more room to do what you would need to do, and still have, maybe depending on how high that would be with trucks coming in, but or have just orient the rehearsal space and the cantilever doors back towards the alley. There, that would solve all of that. But I understand wanting to use it also as production space. My real question is where are people going to go sit? I don't see any space that's really inviting to congregate. The lounge downstairs would be really not fun for a group of folks standing in line, and the terrace upstairs is pretty small, so you'd get shoved down the stairs as you're waiting for a drink. So those are my thoughts. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Brian, what are your thoughts on Perkins and Will?
Can I start with a question first?
Sure.
Is the hope, is the outcome that we're looking for to make a recommendation of one proposal to move forward, or is the hope to come up with direction to give to each of the teams for them to continue to develop their projects?
Well, neither. I think the hope is the hope is to provide direction that, depending on which of the three is selected by the city council, that they would be given some marching orders on things they would need to evolve, develop, rethink, or absolutely keep, because that was the strength. So I think what we're trying to do is generate, I guess the best term is marching orders, depending on which of the three is selected by the council.
Got it. So then to echo what others have said, actually to start with a positive, this project I think is the most unique front of house experience. How a patron arrives on the sidewalk, moves into the theater, experiences the arrival. It is a very unique thing that has been done here. The downside is that it's at the expense of the back of house area. And so if this project was to move forward, I think that the back of house area would have to be looked at for all the reasons that everyone has mentioned about the functionality from a performance standpoint and how the theater works.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Andrew, what are your thoughts on this proposal?
I think you may already know I love this proposal. I love the simplicity, the elegance, the timelessness of the design. And I really think that a lot of the issues that have been brought up can be resolved in a further iteration. I totally agree that we need the elevator for the actors, and additional restrooms would be great. But I have worked in a number of 99-seat theaters, and there's not typically a place for them to sit, but in this particular place, there is that outdoor courtyard. There could be benches placed inside as well. The scissor lift I brought up as a concern last time too, but I discovered that actually a place that I see concerts, Beverly Hills All Saints Episcopal Church, they actually have that to lift up from the basement the grand piano that they use for concerts. So I'm less concerned about that aspect now. And again, I really love the large rehearsal space because I think it's going to create a lot more opportunities for operations in that space, rehearsal space, and possibly workshop space.
All right, thank you. I think we have a lot to go on here. So this is really, really helpful. We thank you all for such insightful comments. So Rogerio, you had some final thoughts on Perkins and Will before we move on?
Yeah, just one last comment, because it was the first thing that jumped out at me when they first presented the project was that they have this open courtyard which kind of leads into the parking, and then they put the stair right next to it. So, and the open space is on the inside of the stair. Would they consider moving the staircase, like flipping the ticket office or the bar area, whatever happens on the lower level, with the staircase so that that open space becomes part of the pocket park? Could they resolve that as they rethink the entry sequence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they could easily take that stair and have it be that intermediate element you were talking about between the parking and the pocket park, and have it go up to a second floor to a cantilever terrace that would extend the capacity of the second floor, for example. So you could have a lot more people milling up there. So you know, I think there's definitely room for this one to evolve without growing exceedingly larger, which was one of the benefits of this design. And so, yeah, I think that's a really helpful observation that that one element, that stair element, does seem to sort of block off the flow a bit, and I think that could definitely be rethought.
Great.
Okay, so if I'm not seeing any other thoughts on this one, let's move to the BAR Architects proposal. One thing I would point out that is sort of interesting about this is, from a height perspective, they're significantly lower than the other two. And so I think there was some concerns about the performance space and the space in section and some of the second floor spaces. And I would wonder if one of the evolutions of this one would be to explore vertical volume a little bit more, because it seems like they have some space that they've left on the table, so to speak, there that was used very well by Grimshaw and Perkins and Will. But again, we received some very insightful thoughts thus far, including their use of the sidewalk and the forecourt, the way they integrated the marquee in multiple directions, so that there's sort of visibility from a number of areas, but some concerns about the efficiency of their floor plan and circulation space, and some of the relationships of interior programming. So let's open the floor to the BAR proposal and see if see what marching orders they would be given should they move forward. What would you like to see remain, and what needs to be evolved or reconsidered? So Uzair, I see your hand up.
Thanks. I think just quite simply, they have to work on their circulation space. And I think they need to work on that restroom concept that they have on the upper floor. I think there's a lot of wasted space, especially even if you're on the upper floor and looking at the electrical room and the mechanical, and sorry, in the lighting room up there. And just there just seems to be a hallway to nowhere. And there wasn't feeling like there was a lot of thought around the interior space. So I think that's definitely of concern to me.
Absolutely. And I think this might be the one that Lynn was suggesting, extending the cantilevers a little bit more so that second floor would have a little bit more space. And I think that may, particularly in front of the restrooms, create a whole other space that would really be beneficial. Okay, I see Esther and then Brian.
So I'll stay out of all the technical space. And I think if one were to kind of do what one usually does, is take the best of all the schemes and put it together to some extent. I think this one, the BAR scheme, definitely has the courtyard space that feels most intentional, most generous, and most usable for a variety of events. I'll leave the opening, how that space opens up into the theater space for the technical folks and other access issues. But the other thing that I really appreciated about this scheme is it maybe, it is overly generous with circulation space on the second floor. And it is not a traditional restroom layout, but I think in terms of non-gender specific restrooms, this is the way public space is going, with individual toilet rooms and shared sink facilities, and where people will mix. And what I really appreciated about the second floor, ignoring all the functional things about the technical things, was that it brought a sense of theater to the event of going to the theater. I recently was at one of the movie palaces downtown. Actually, I was at the one in Westwood, one of the historic theaters there, and that tradition of making an event out of the intermission, of being seen and people watching in the space and from the street, is something that I think is part of the kind of identity of the city. It's so important. This isn't a city where you go and hide in a building or quickly go in and don't want to be seen, get dropped off and hide right away. So that's, if there's a quality that I think is successful here, it's that at the expense of functionality maybe. And if I could ask that that's a quality that be shared across all the schemes, to really look at that, to make this an event of going to an event.
Great, thank you, Esther. I think the sort of spectacle or the event of going to the event, I think, is a really important opportunity to rethink what that means in the 21st century in West Hollywood, and how that ties into the type of performance and diversity and range of performances that are going to take place, and the opportunities to make art in this space. So I think the audience and the spectator and the performer start to have really interesting relationships. So I'm really glad you brought that up. And to the extent that the architecture and the facility design and the landscape design can foster some of these different kind of opportunities, that's a great point. Brian,
can I just,
sure,
Rick, one more thing, which is about the marquee.
Mm-hmm.
One thing is, I felt like the Perkinsville approach of a kind of old school, poster or something that's hung there was, I think we have to accept that we should be thinking about technology. I could have seen how their poster could have been a video screen, obviously, but I think that's a good thing to see, is like really embracing the technology of the image on the outside. And then the last thing is just interesting contrast between when Grimshaw presented their scheme, they were very clear. They saw the building as an icon. And I'll stress again that what I saw in the BAR scheme, and maybe on Perkins and Will too, is more of the people and the interaction of people and the social interaction as the spectacle, the event going on, where the building recedes a little bit to put them out front.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, Brian, to be followed by Rogerio.
So to echo what Esther said a little bit, that by far the best part about the BAR scheme is that exterior courtyard and the relationship to scale, and that part of it looks really nice in this rendering. My reaction to this rendering, especially into the building sections, and even Rick, to your comment about this building is lower, it's because it's not very realistic. There's a lot of stuff happening here that looks really nice in a rendering that is not reality. And the biggest one is the two-way cantilever at the corner here that is supported on almost no structure. The same with the roof. And when we don't put parapets on buildings, when we don't show those assemblies in the proportions that they need to be, what happens is when we start to develop this design, the building looks very different than what's been promised. And I have a very strong reaction to this design because it is devoid of a lot of the things that are the realities that will impact this design as it gets developed farther. And there are mechanical units that are going to have to go somewhere. But if we don't show a parapet in the thickness of some of the other schemes, if we don't show structure to support the building hanging out into space, we're signing off on something that's going to look very different, and we don't know what that is. And so just like with the Perkins and Will comment, I would say that to the city, if you were going to move forward with this design, this one needs a lot of technical development to illustrate that those practical things can be achieved. Places for mechanical units, the thickness of the building so you can support the floors and the ceilings, because I think the rendering is really beautiful. It's a really nice looking courtyard space. I think it's not going to look really good when we put a huge chiller in the middle of it because there's no place for the mechanical units. And so I would very, very much recommend on this one that it would have to be developed farther to have a much more detailed proof of concept of what's going on here.
Yeah, point well taken. And I think this one would have to evolve quite a bit in its design if it were to move forward. I agree with you. So thank you for that. Rogerio?
Yeah, Esther and Brian made some great comments, and I completely agree. The only thing I have to add to it is that during the presentation, it was engaging. I do like how they had a very specific approach to that bathroom experience, and none of the other two schemes didn't have one at all and didn't seem to be programmed correctly. So I appreciated that. I also appreciated their attention to the courtyard and how the theater space works. But overall, the scheme feels schematic at best. And I feel like if it was to be executed the way it is, which we know that it couldn't be, but it would already feel dated. I've seen this building before, and it just needs a lot of evolution. It needs another layer of evolution to get it to a level that the Perkins and Will and Grimshaw building, the way their elevations are articulated and thought through.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments on this one that would have to?
Rick, I have my hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Martin, I'm not seeing your hand. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. I just want to say something that may be a little bit difficult to take into account, but needs to be, I think, is that the building that will be built to the east of this project, I don't know what the program is for that. I don't know how large it's going to be, but I think this BAR project is in the most danger of being lost and looking out of place in terms of any large building that goes next door.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think realistically, we have to anticipate, 5 or 6 stories potentially as part of a complex for the rest of the block. That's an excellent point. Okay, Andrew, am I seeing your hand there?
No, you're
No?
not.
Okay, I'm sorry. Anybody else on BA Architects? Okay, not seeing any. We'll move to the final one, which is the Grimshaw proposal. Again, we heard a lot of really useful comments. Some strengths were the art gallery space along the front, a more realistic sort of set of relationships and programs in terms of what it would need to be for actual staging of theater. Some concerns were about maybe the green roof and some of the weight, also the storefront itself being less engaging perhaps for the pedestrian. And so let's see if there's some marching orders for Grimshaw from the group. All right, Rogerio, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, this is a hard one because of the three, this is the most sophisticated, this is the most realistic. It hits all the points that Lindsay had made about the Perkins and Will project in the last presentation. I can see this actually coming to life. What I don't love about it is, we did that when I was on Arts and Cultural Affairs, we did that art installation at the school on the corner of Melrose and La Cienega. And they have a similar gallery space along the sidewalk. And I love the art piece that's there. But I don't often see people sort of engaging with it in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, is that an appropriate approach to this entry sequence that they have here? Like I was imagining when they were presenting, could you open up that wall and could it spill out onto the street? And I know from an operational point of view, that would probably be very problematic. But I kept on wanting to open the box up, somehow. I just felt so tight. But I understand also that program works very well for the functionality of the theater. So I know it's important. And then I made the comment earlier that it kind of feels like the Blue Dot building on Beverly. And not that it's a bad thing, but I feel like I've seen this before. So is it the landmark building that we want it to be? Could it be? Yes. But this one's a little harder for me to sort of break down, other than I keep on wanting to open it up because it feels so tight and closed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Brian, followed by Lindsay, and then Andrew.
So I will echo the last comments that I think functionally this building is by far, I think the most successful as far as a user experience, a guest experience for performers. It's a really highly functional, successful building in that way. I think architecturally it does need some development, but undoubtedly a firm like Grimshaw is going to get that there at some point in this process. I would say to the city, the things that I would want to look at with this, because I think this project would benefit by far the most by the removal of the parking. Because if that parking could be removed, this building could be pushed back in the alley, and then you could get that entirety of the length of those parking spaces as usable public open space on the front of this building. And I think that would be a worthy thing to look at here. I know that there's other questions about parking that would have to be answered, but I would say that is worth looking at. And my comment to the architects would be, the one thing that I would look at is taking the second story rehearsal space that is within the black box and look at stacking that on top of the back of house space in the back. That way you could get that entirety of that black of the black box as a full 30-foot usable space. I think that that would be to the benefit of performers and to patrons, and I think would be worth looking at. But again, just functionally, this project works really well. You may also want to consider looking at the entry sequence and whether or not the entry into that courtyard versus coming directly off the sidewalk into the entry is something that that is worthy of looking at. But otherwise, I think a very successful schematic layout for a building.
Great, thank you, Brian. Yeah, I had a similar thought about that rehearsal space and flipping. So I'm glad you pointed that out. I thought that was interesting. Lindsay, followed by Andrew.
So Brian and I are hooked at an umbilical cord here. I had mentioned last time that I didn't feel that we needed an outdoor terrace, in number 6, if you're looking on, on their PDF file. I agree, Brian. I think that would be awesome to move the rehearsal space to the back of the house. And, I remember walking, down San Vicente in front of City Council chambers, and there's, while there was a cafe there, it wasn't used a whole lot. And then the space that's right next to it, that we sort of exhibit things sometimes, people just pass by. And so if we could push back and have the kind of open space that the BAR architects offer, we could move the entrance to the theater back to the front, and then the spill out would be naturally into the front. I think it would be beautiful, Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Oh, but just to say, yeah, by far, this was the firm that came, and it appears that they've done this before, that they're very sensitive to the needs of the artists that are going to be working and the administrators that are also going to be working in the building. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Lindsay. Andrew, followed by Esther.
Yes, I agree with Rogerio and Brian. I think that it is very boxy, and I think opening up that, what I was thinking is opening up that entryway to make that an open space. So like the southeast corner, I think it would be, if there's a way to open that up, I think that would provide a little bit more dynamism to it. I am concerned about maintenance. This isn't really my territory, but the polycarbonate and the amount of windows, it looks like that could be very maintenance heavy, especially with the white polycarbonate. Will it get dirty, and how will you clean it? It looks a little challenging to me on that front.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Andrew. So that's something we would definitely want them to dive deeper on should they be developing this idea. Esther, followed by Brian.
Yeah, I have so much respect for everyone else who's commented, and I think there's some really good ideas about how to modify this scheme, and it's a long way ahead of the other ones, it seems, in terms of really working. I'm looking at the second floor rehearsal and viewing mezzanine, and I was wondering if this might be less boxy and provide some more life on the street. Actually, if that plane could actually step back and, like the Perkins and Will scheme, create an outdoor event area and a kind of outdoor lobby up there that actually would be spacious enough for people to gather and enjoy themselves. It would catch some nice light from the south, and I agree. I don't really think that an outdoor terrace on the north side of the building, kind of tucked in there, overlooking a parking lot, is necessarily a very attractive space. So maybe if that rehearsal space flipped back on the north side, that would help out. But those are my main things. Is I think this is probably the least resolved scheme in terms of a really good relationship and proportions of outdoor space. And I think if they could work on that some more, it might, make it feel much more part of a kind of regional environment. And I've said it before. I mean, and I'm not convinced that a green roof is adding that much to the project.
Okay, Thank you. I think their argument on that would be that if there is development in the future that's larger scale, that you would be looking down. So I think for them, that was part of their motivation, if I
Yeah, but
recall.
it's a major maintenance,
Mhm.
exercise to keep that looking.
Yeah, and it's not
Probably.
occupiable, which,
Right.
if it was a demonstration botanical kind of thing that one could go up and have lunch and enjoy, but it's, it's part of the biodiversity and education. I don't know. I think it would, if you'd want more bang for the buck if it's going to be expensive, right?
Right. And I suspect there are other ways to create an interesting view from above.
Mhm.
That's not the only solution.
Sure. Yeah. I think I'm just reminding for those who didn't see the first presentation what their thought process was. Okay. Anybody else? Not seeing. Okay, who's there?
I'll just add in some quick 2 cents. I do agree that, functionally, the Grimshaw project proposal provides the most complete project. I just feel like it could take some more risks and really open it up. It just feels like another building on the street, and frankly reminds me of some buildings that just got taken down in mid-city.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. Great, well, thank you. I think in terms of marching orders, we've got a pretty good list for all three of these now. So that's very helpful. So I think we will move into sort of wrap up mode. And so let me share a few things with our advisory group and our community members who have joined us. So we've asked each of the three firms for a formal proposal to move forward. That will include both a fee proposal and the type of consultant team that they would put together. So I think that's also going to help ultimately to make a decision with the city council. So we want to see also as part of that proposal how they imagine a community engagement process and making sure that the diverse voices in the community are considered in any new design. So that will be coming forward in the next couple of weeks. And we're hoping to bring this item to the city council, either the last meeting in September or most likely the first meeting in October for a selection of the team. And once that team is selected, as I mentioned, it would almost be a start over in terms of starting with the programming process to make sure that all the right spaces are accounted for, both technically and operationally and functionally. And then we would go through a community process to develop a final schematic design that then can be budgeted and go forward. For our advisory group, you were given evaluation forms. So you're more than welcome to add some notes based on tonight's conversation. But if you would get those to us, say by the end of this week, by Friday, we're going to be compiling all the thoughts. But tonight was just really beyond, I think, what we were hoping, just really so helpful to hear the depth and thoughtfulness and the just far range of consideration that you've given each of these three schemes. We can't thank you enough for the time. It's been a real pleasure to have all of you advise us. And so we've set aside some time here at the end to get some final thoughts from all our advisory group members, if any of you would care to comment. Martin, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I just want to reiterate, if anything should happen differently about this parking, the city could really use a really nice formal exhibition space.
On adding to the program, you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Rogerio?
Yeah, going back to the parking. So obviously we don't have enough time to even ask the applicants to consider the possibility of how they would how their scheme would change if the parking went away.
Mhm.
So that conversation will be had once somebody is selected, and once they go back into redesign, then they'll discuss whether we can actively remove the parking, or is that completely off the table?
It's not completely off the table. I think it's going to take a little bit more investigation. We have to work with our property development division to look at the leases and what some of the promises were made. We have to look at the amount of time left on the leases, because I think some of them are varied and may be expiring by the time we would be building. So there's a few layers and variables that we'll have to look at. And of course, we'll want to talk specifically to the tenants and make sure that we're not going to disrupt their operations decidedly, you know, as we go forward. So we'll be working at the staff level to answer some of those things. But I think what has been very clear tonight is if there's any possibility at all that we can resolve, you know, that parking in another way, that would be the preference. And I'm sure all three of the teams would love to see that happen, because it would open up tremendous possibilities, you know, both on the servicing of the facility and the open space. So we will work to see what we can do on that end. We've heard that loud and clear. So thank you for reinforcing that. Lindsay.
So if there is a resolution to the parking problem and these folks are able to redesign or reconfigure, would we have an opportunity to take a look at that?
Well, I think with the selected team, we would, yes. I think there's a certain desire to get moving. I know the arts division has told us that they're ready to program this tomorrow. So I think we'd be hesitant to spend another, you know, 4 to 6 months on the selection process and, you know, delay it unnecessarily. So I think the consensus, at least amongst the staff, is we would like to move forward as soon as possible. And so we'll make sure, though, that whichever team is selected, we will explore that. I would remind everybody that we do have a budget. So even if we have more space to work with, that doesn't necessarily mean we have ability to increase the size of the building demonstrably. But I think in all these cases, maybe a little bit more space could help all of them in some way. So we will look at that. Okay. Any other comments from the advisory group? Wrap up thoughts. We really again want to thank you all for participating. I know personally, I can tell you I've learned a lot from listening, and I think the process was really valuable. So thank you so much. Esther, any wrap up thoughts?
I just want to thank you for inviting me for the opportunity to participate in this. This was a most interesting couple of weeks, and I look forward to seeing what happens.
Thank you, Esther. Rebecca, you want to share
Hi,
some thoughts?
everyone.
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Rebecca Eman, Arts Manager for the city. I wanted to thank everyone on the advisory group and the members of the public who took time to participate in this process. It was very insightful, and all of your combined brain dumping into this kind of mix was I think extremely helpful for everybody. I think we all learned a little something. Some of us learned a lot of something. And so I know that as a collective, you all were able to provide such informative feedback that it's really going to help make council's job very easy, I think. I think they're going to be able to kind of identify which project best suits the city. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Okay. So I'm not seeing any other hands. So again, I just want to thank thank you all for your participation. Stay tuned, because hopefully within the next 2 months or so, we'll have an announcement on the selected team. And then we'd invite anybody who's interested in continuing to participate as part of the process. You're more than welcome. So thank you all for taking time this evening. We really appreciate it. And then my last comment is to Garen Yalls and Marco Aguilar in the Urban Design Division. We couldn't have done this without you. Thank you so much for all the work to put this together and facilitate the meeting. Garen, you've put in a lot of time and effort, and thank you for that. And to Eva and the arts team, we're looking forward to your continued input and really getting your hands into this next phase, which is going to be so important. So thank you to our city staff. And with that, we'll say good evening and good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.